I wanted to give my thoughts on The Way of Kings, Brandon Sanderson's giant fantasy epic novel for the Stormlight archive. It's supposed to be 10 books or something astronomical or crazy or anything like that. And I've been listening through the audiobook. Honestly, it's a fantastic audiobook from there. And I'm about halfway through the second book. And I wanted to get my thoughts out and kind of talk about what I liked, what I didn't, and kind of, generally my overall thoughts on the book. So from the beginning, the book, I do not believe that this book will be for everyone in that regard. I think if you love fantasy, if you love Brandon Sanderson, I think you will love it hands down from there. The difficult part with this book is it has a very slow beginning. And I think a lot of people would be turned off by it. You know, if you make it through this build-up section of it, it builds towards this fantastic ending, but it's almost painful to some degree how slow it goes in the moment. You know, but if you make it, it's worth it. It's kind of torturous. You're waiting for these characters that they've built up and developed to meet and interact, so you can see, because you know what it'll mean. That would be so much cooler, it'd be so greater if this, that, all this. But it's like they're circling and circling and circling and circling, and you're like waiting for them to finally meet, and then they do, and it's like, and then you can't put the book down, and it's fantastic from there. But it takes a long time to get there. You know, this is a very slow build from here. So generally, for the world, it takes place in a fantasy world where you have this really interesting class division by eye color. So Lighteyes, people with lighter colored eyes, are the elite, the royalty, and the people with darker eyes are the lowborn from there. So you have a whole bunch of points of view through this fantasy world. He jumps around from, this character over here, this character over there, and it kind of bounces back and forth, and they're introducing all these different moving pieces and everything like that. And so one of the main characters that we're introduced to is Kaladin, who plays the more traditional lead you'd meet in sort of most fantasy stories, where he's the young, action adventure hero that's going forth. He wants to go on a journey and find his way in the world. He plays much more the traditional character for that. Now, the difference, the spin on this, what makes it unique, he's not a shepherd, thank God. The spin for his character is that he's much more militarily advanced than most people. He's not a beginner, he's not a newbie. We kind of meet him for the first time in battle, and despite the fact that he's very young, he's a very experienced military commander. Compared to today's. He doesn't know everything, but he's very, very skilled in that regard. And it's really nice. It's very refreshing to have a character who actually knows what they're doing. It's really, I'm completely bored with the young shepherd who has nothing, who has to learn how to do everything. It's kind of annoying. You kind of want them to be able to at least a little bit to know what they're doing from here. The main kingdom that we have that we're introduced to is called Alethkar, and it's where the Alethi live, and the backstory, kind of what we're introduced for in the first part of the book, is the assassination of the Alethi king, Gavilar. He's feasting, and they're having all this going on, and he's attacked by this mysterious assassin in white using all these magical powers. We can change gravity and everything like that, and he has this magic sword that goes through there, and he kills the king. And it's blamed, and there's a group called the Parshindi, a group of unknown people on this place called the Shattered Plains that live way out there, who have taken credit for this assassination. And so the kingdom of Alethkar, all the surviving, nobles and all the military and everything like that, have to go and want to go and avenge their king. So they're going and make war upon the Parshindi and fight over what's called the Shattered Plains, which is this giant badlands, or just bedrock everywhere, which is like separated by these fractured gorges and chasms from there. So you have to use bridges to get over, or Parshindi are able to jump over using mysterious technology or abilities. They're able to get over from there. And that's kind of the backdrop, the powder keg, if you will. From here, you have this whole military might that's making war upon these people, and they're fighting through these plains, which adds really interesting terrain and tactical difficulties, which Sanderson does a really good job trying to address. Saying, how would someone who's really smart, and a very experienced military commander, how would they take this problem from here? And it's like, okay, you have to balance all. Do you want them to just fight head on? Okay, you don't want them to do that. Maybe you want them to fight little by little, but why do they do that? Well, turns out the kingdom of Alethkar is very loosely held together. They were only recently made whole by the king Gavilar, who's now dead. So now his very weaker son, and not nearly as powerful or politically savvy son, Alokar, that's how the audiobook pronounces it. Alokar is the king, but he's a very weak king. So all the high princes who, are serving him, well, they did swear an oath. They swore an oath to his father and to the throne. So it's like this kingdom is barely held together. So they can't just go and invade because they all hate each other. And you have all this political tension going on back and forth from here. And so we have Kaladin, who's one point of view. The other one is Shallan Davar. And Shallan Davar is kind of a tricky character. I always appreciate it when people try something different. Her character's journey and her development is really good. She changes over the course of events, and I really like to see what it's going for. But this is probably the weakest character in the series, or I would say the series, in the book so far, because she kind of just comes across like a quirky girl who's not like the other girls from there. And again, it's like the more you learn about her, the more you understand why she's that way, and like logically it makes sense, but it doesn't always land solidly. So I would say, again, this is the reason why I want to warn people about this in terms of if they're reading this and they're like, oh my gosh, is it ever going to get better and everything like that? Just, you need to know what you're signing up for. Because, I know some people who, this is a 1,000-page fantasy book and they're like wholly intimidated by that. They're not going to be able to do that. And so you need to understand what it is. Like for me, fantasy books, this is the bread and butter. 10 series, each 1,000, each book 1,000 pages plus. This is pretty normal. This is run-of-the-mill fantasy from there. But for some people who aren't familiar with it or aren't really sure on fantasy, this can be pretty insurmountable. So, do you need, when you're trying to weigh, is this the right book for me or should I give it a shot? I absolutely think you should give it a shot. But if you ever get to a point in a book you're like, oh my gosh, is the rest of the book going to be like this? It's like, no, it's going to get better. They're going to address certain issues from there. And Shallan Davar is, a disgraced, her family is falling apart from there after the death of her father, and they're trying to hold all the pieces together. And so she's going to become the ward, to try and become the ward of Dalinar Kholin, who's related to the king of Alethkar. But Yasna is this kind of heretical pariah scholar that goes on from there. And in this world there, it is really cool to see the division. There's a lot of gendered division of professions. All the reading and writing and arts is all relegated to the female gender from there. And so Yasna, being a woman, is a scholar. She's a great, very well-known scholar. And so Shallan Davar, also female, wants to become a scholar. So she wants to study under Yasna. And you see this whole balance up. And it's a really cool balance to see where all the men are trying to, like, none of them can read and none of them can write because, their focus, their entire people's focus for the male strata of careers is largely around combat and the glory of fighting. They had this strong focus. So it really adds this cool, in-depth aspect from there. And probably the thing that I really appreciate the most about this book so far is there is a lot that goes on with series and everything like that, where they'll have a character who tries to achieve some goal, whatever it is, and they'll try really hard, and nobody else in this world has been able to succeed. And they try really hard, and they fail. And then they try really hard, and then they succeed. And it almost feels like they succeed because they're the main character who tried. And it's like, oh, all the people who failed before them, it's just because they weren't the main character. That's the reason why they could never actually succeed in their goal. Shallan is trying to get Yasna to take her on as a ward, and Yasna's like, no. And so Shallan tries all this other stuff again, no. And all this stuff, no. And so it's like, it's really cool to see this play out because inevitably she does achieve her goal, but it really feels earned. Like, it's not easy. And so there's a danger aspect for that because it means it takes forever, and you have this, nobody loves to live in failure, but it gives a really good realistic taste to this book, which for fantasy is always what you want because you're always risking losing people with this kind of crazy fantastical elements that you're going to completely run them over with. So from there, that's kind of Shallan. So we have Shallan, we have Kaladin, who is our young, typical, more traditional lead, and probably the third main point of view that we have that probably carries most of the book for me is Dalinar Kholin, the brother of the assassinated king. And I love these type of characters because they really don't fit the traditional young shepherd chosen one with magical sword whose father's secret, yada, yada, yada. From there, Dalinar is mid-50s. He's an established elite. He's incredibly smart. He's very talented. He's a great character. He's giving, on Kaladin's point of view and Shallan, they're kind of like really young and they're looking up at society, trying to make their way in the world. They're, they don't know how to act or how to fight. They're learning all this stuff. Dalinar is almost at the top of the world looking down, trying to figure out how to move these pieces. And there's rivalries between the other high princes, and they're trying to figure it out. And so you have this nice balance of younger, weaker, less established characters, and with the opposite of Dalinar as one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. And what this does is it gives you a balance of perspective. You know, on one hand, you have all these characters fighting their way up, and then Dalinar over here is up, and he's trying to fight his way among his equals. You have this nice, seesaw balance of perspective, and what it does is help keep it interesting and what you're fighting for and all this, and each party has something that they have to give to the other character. So you're really just fighting through this book, waiting for them to get on the same side, get together, find each other, and make this whole thing work. The weapons and world building in this series is absolutely fantastic. I really, really have enjoyed it so far. So they use these things called, they're the ancient technology of a lost age from there, and it mainly takes the form of shard blades and shard plates. So shard blades are there's magical swords like 6 foot long that can cleave through anything. Nothing can block it except for another shard blade or shard plate. So if you're fighting against somebody, you slice them with a shard blade, they raise their sword up to defend, it goes straight through the sword and kills the person. So basically these swords are like the nuclear weapons essentially of this fantasy world. And so you can take this and you can fight against them, and you can basically destroy and kill everyone unless they have another one. But they're so valuable that it's very risky, so you don't want to risk your shard blades. And so you'll pair it up with shard plate, which is this special armor that kind of uses the same technology, and it allows people to move much quicker than they would normally, and also tank shard blade hits. So from there, so you have Dalinar has this plate, shard plate, and a shard blade that he uses to go out to great effect. In his past has been able to kill all these people and help unite the kingdoms. And so what you do is you have this really cool aspect. Now, the reason why you do lost technology is so you can have limited amount from there. Because otherwise you have to explain, gosh, if these are the nuclear weapons that, without fallout, there's basically no downside. There's like, oh, well, there's not so many of them and we can't recreate them, so that's the reason why they're so valuable. And you have all this power struggle. The world he's done a great job with the world about building out all the political and economic, everything around these weapons, where what that means, because it's like if you have one of these weapons, theoretically you can kill thousands and thousands of people. And that is, again, it's the fantasy medieval equivalent of a nuclear arsenal, or like an F-16 or something like that, where you have these bombs that can just kill endless number of people with very little damage or harm to yourself. And it's like, okay, that changes the world, that changes the dynamic. So you have these shard blades that are basically worth more than kingdoms, and if you have more than them, then everybody else is scared of you at that point. And so this part is really, really cool to build out and see the greater implications and, the shattered effects from society. Everybody wants a shard blade. Everybody's looking up for the dream of getting their own. And it's really, really cool. It's a very, very good mechanism to kind of advance the plot and have it so you can have these people feel like superheroes. It really reminds me very much so of like a Gundam wing, like a person-sized, slightly larger Gundam wing, because it's like you're fighting with tanks and you got your M16s and AK-47s, and somebody shows up with a Gundam and just flies through everybody and just completely defeats them. This is the same thing, where it's like you're fighting on a completely different arsenal level at that point. And this goes back to reinforce into what I touched on earlier, where you have this class distinction of the Lighteyes versus the Darkeyes, and so all the shard blades and all the shard plate obviously belong to the Lighteyes. It's kind of how you help maintain your control, your nobility, your prestige, everything from there. And I wanted to touch base on just how much I love the eye color aspect of this class distinction, because there's a very, very tricky thing that happens where if you bring up racial tensions and racial hatred in books, you really have to be careful, because so many people read everything into it from at this point, especially if you're talking about a fantasy book that's really not supposed to look like the American South, which people will, if anytime you bring up that, they're going to draw these connections and draw these illusions. And if you're not trying to make a book about that, where you want it to be a fantasy world alien from what we know, you don't really want people bringing American politics into it and drawing this conclusion. However, racial tensions is a reality of the world. And so it's this tricky line that you have to do where, hey, this exists and it's very real, and maybe you want to touch about it. Maybe you want to have some social dynamics going on, because it turns out people generally throughout time, people have hated people who look different, who act different. This is kind of just how it works. And you really want to stop it. If you could, we would, but here we are. And so if you want to have a fantasy world that is fantasy and feels fantasy and doesn't feel like 21st century American politics, you have to be really careful. You have to thread this line. So what Sanderson has done is he's done very similarly something that is genetically inherited, so it's something that does kind of have this generational weight to it, and of course it benefits some people and it's absolutely tragic for other people, and you want to have this dynamic. We've all seen Django Unchained. You can see this aspect come into play, and it's really cool to see these characters react this way, that way, or the other. But again, you don't want it to feel like the American South or American politics. You want to write a fantasy world that doesn't have this illusion to it, but has the same mechanic. It has the same mechanic from here, where you hate people for something that they can't control. You treat people differently for something that they can't control. You treat the Lighteyes better than you would the Darkeyes, or the Darkeyes all hate the Lighteyes. You have this class distinction, but it also has this cool unifying aspect where you can have all of these people. Kaladin is a part of a group, the Bridgemen, and they're from everywhere. They have different skin color, they have everything, but they're kind of united in the fact that they all have dark eyes because they're of lower class, so they're kind of relegated to this slavery aspect. So it's really, really cleverly well done, and I absolutely love it because it lets you have a lot of the stuff in a story that you might want for revenge, for class tensions, racial. From there lets you have all of this aspect while also having this cool part where everyone kind of Darkeyes gets along despite their skin color. They just don't really care. It just doesn't come up, because what matters, eye color. That's what really controls the dynamic. But again, it also makes so it doesn't feel like you're in the American South or trying to draw on these illusions. Because again, even if an author threads that needle so perfectly well, people will still read into it, because people read what they want to in stories all the time, and it would be absolutely toxic to it and it would just be brutal. It would probably ruin it, and everyone would be like, yes, I didn't really care for the commentary on modern American politics, or blah, 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 from there. And it's just like, it would really distract from it and take you out of the story, and it would absolutely, it would be a roadblock you would want to avoid at all costs. And going through, I've finished the first book and I'm working my way through the second. And so looking at the first book, because I kind of want to talk about this as an introductory story to the entire series. The series really has a similar structure and flow as Naruto, almost like an anime from here. Because what you have is these really, really long, well drawn out arcs that are really slow. They start off slow. You have a bad guy, you have a setup, you have a main character who has, limitation or anything like that. And then you slowly go through these training arcs, and they're going from here, because Kaladin is basically going through all these, like, the technology so far in the first book is advanced like crazy amounts. So by the end of it, who knows what we're going to have by the end of it. But from here, with each advancement, you have these training arcs where he's learning to this. You have this limitation. You can't defeat them. You can't do this. There's this enemy who's high up on a hill and is oppressing and murdering everybody, and you can't do anything about it. And so you want to do, so you fight, you learn this new power, you fight, and you find aspects to express this new power and try it out and see if you can rise up to this challenge that seems to be waiting up for you, and that the audience is like screaming, go, 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 because you want the characters to fight, you want them to reach it, you want to defeat the enemy. And that's kind of what we have, this flow, this ebb and flow for the story that really, really reminds me of. So it really reminds me of Naruto or any of the animes that have these drawn out arcs from here. And again, this is what I talked about, the weakness of it, because it is really slow. It starts off really slow and it takes a while to get anywhere, but once it starts going, you almost can't hang on. It's going so fast and you just can't put it down. So you have to see through it to the end, because again, he's building it very, very slowly, because he wants you to, it's almost agonizingly slow so that you can savor it. There's this aspect of making it seem real, because if at any point the main character could go and defeat the enemy, the climactic fight at the end doesn't really matter, because it could have happened at any point. It doesn't really matter. It could happen. But when it feels real, you have this limitation of like, this is your chance. If you don't take this chance, you might not have another one. And so they jump in and go through it. And it's really cool to see it play out. And it's really satisfying, because training arcs are done for a reason. They're incredibly satisfying because you have a leveling up sense. You learn how to do this with your abilities. Kaladin has all these things that start happening to him. Shallan has these things going on. Dalinar is learning more about this, how to use this. It's almost this level up sequence where they're figuring out how to do this, and then a fight comes up. And then you really want to see them use this. They're training and training and training for so long, and all this moments, and somebody comes up, the villain, the moment you have to save this person, and you get to see it play out. And it's really, really cool to see it come into play, and it's incredibly satisfying. And this is what is kind of built up this crazy hype for the story that I didn't really understand until I read it, because now I get it, because I've had a number of people, especially people who don't really read fantasy or aren't into it, they've looked and said, oh, this book is awesome. You know, this is what you're looking at. The ending, they always talked about the ending of book one. Even the ones who warned me about how slow it was, they said, once you get to the ending, it's so worth it. You know, it feels like I had this image of an archer, and you're like knocking an arrow to the bowstring, and you drawing it back just a little bit, and you're waiting for the release, because, you know, you're setting at this target. You know, somebody's about to kill your family or anything like that. You're watching this guy with a bow, and then he pulls it back a little bit farther, and you're waiting. You're still waiting, and you draw it farther back, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and draw farther back and farther back and farther back and farther. And it's like eventually he's got it fully knocked, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you want the guy to shoot him before something bad happens. Shoot him, and then he draws it back even farther, and now you're just like losing your mind, and it's like, and then he draws it back even farther, and then you're like, wait, and then the arrow hits, and the guy dies, and it's just like this satisfying. And the reason why is because it does have this slow build, because it's like you're drawn in, it's so slow to the point of almost being agonizing, and it's just it continually draws you in, and but it pays off. It's just this explosive ending. And again, I keep saying it's like as if it's one moment, but it's not. It's like hundreds of pages towards the end that are just absolutely incredible. It's really, really, really well done. The narrative is built towards us so well for it. But again, it takes a while to get there. So you need to figure out what type of book is good for you. Are you the type of person that can make it through to the end? Are you the person who can make it all the way to the end? And maybe you're not. Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. And that's the thing you need to figure out. I think it is definitely worth a try, and I think everyone should give it a shot, because I think Sanderson's done something really, really cool here. Again, I'm working my way through book 2, and we'll see if I make it all the way through the series. Again, this is a really long series, and it's a lot to set up for, but I would kind of be okay. I wouldn't be okay stopping so far. I think, as I've heard, book 2 has a very good conclusive ending, so we'll see at that point. But at book 1, you will almost immediately runs into book 2. So if you make it to the end of book 2, you're going to go into finish book 1, you'll go into book 2 from there. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this. Let me know what you think. You know, do you agree with me? Do you disagree? What drew you? Did it work? Did the book work for you? Because maybe you guys hated it. Maybe you loved it. And there, just post it down in the comments and let me know what you think. And yeah, please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.